So thank you everyone for watching yet another episode in which I talk about issues related to public transportation. And what we're going to do this time is we're going to talk about the question of fares, fare payment systems, and fare payment technology. And I'm going to distinguish the system from the technology. Technology is, for example, a smart card is technology. Magnetic card is technology. Phone that lets you just tap your phone and not have to deal with a separate card, that's also a technology. When I say system, I mean things like, are there fare barriers? Or how are fares distinguished? What are the monthly passes? How do they look like? But when I say how do they look like, I don't mean what the card looks like. I mean, how much do they charge? And this is a matter that I think I mentioned actually in my previous week's episode about what frontier countries can learn from each other, mostly because different frontier countries do this differently, and some of these solutions are better than others. So first of all, the question. So first of all, there's the question of how high should the fare be, right? Because there are people, for example, the mayor of Paris, who is currently running for president of France and is polling 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, number 7, who claims that public transport should be free and does not run public transport in Paris, but thinks that other people should pay that to make sure the public transportation is free. This is not really happening, again, because the money has to come from somewhere. That's something that you see a little bit in like whatever is left of. It's mostly left. If you want to characterize free transit at this point, it's left-wing people who are never going to be selected for competence because, for example, in France, if you're competent, you just defected from the Socialist Party to Macron. So Hidalgo is what's left. In the United States, you see a lot of that with DSA people who are kind of counter selected for, let's say, being able to implement single-payer healthcare, because if they could do that, the Democratic Party would hire them at terrible wage and would not actually implement any of that, it would hire them. And so the reason that systems charge fares is that the fares generate a lot of money, and the money is used to pay for the system. Now, there is the question of how high should this be, and this is where you're starting seeing divergence, because there are places that think that public transportation should be profitable, and I don't think anyone ever wants public transport fares to maximize profit. That, as far as I can tell, never exists among big mass transit firms. I mean, it might be. I mean, maybe there's a maybe it's things in the gap, some kind of jitney service, but not something that people voluntarily rely on. So it's not so. Let's say in Singapore, which is very Thatcherite, very. In the UK, I'm not sure what National Rail does, but the tube does not maximize revenue. Or maximize profit. And this is something. So we're going to get to the UK in a sec. But the Asian system, which you can see glimpses of actually in London, is emphatically non-revenue maximizing or profit maximizing. This is really important. When you profit maximize, you are going to hold fares at much higher levels in order to, because you can find people who will pay them. And so this is clearly not what we're seeing in, for example, Tokyo or in Singapore. Singapore is very Thatcherite. So I'm going to actually use that as my example and not Tokyo. Because in Tokyo there is much more of a sense of public service that maybe should not be cut just because some PAP hack wants to justify his multiple millions of dollars a year in ministerial salaries. And in Singapore, absolutely, they insist that public transport be profitable, which it is. But for example, you can see that the trains are incredibly crowded at rush hour. This is also the case very legendarily in Tokyo, and also the case in London. So in London, the trains are. So London has this very weird situation. I actually want to highlight for a moment. Pedestrian observations. What do I need to? What keywords do I want? Besides the fact that I should spell my blog name correctly. Not London. Ridership per kilometer. So this is something that this is just a data collation thing that they kind of want to show people, which is may fix on the right side. Yes, it is. Which is so this is not a comprehensive table. For example, I have a lot of gaps, and in some places I found information that's complete in some. For example, the entire former Soviet Union, I have complete data for. So this is why you see at the bottom random ex-Soviet cities, just because I have data for all of them. Whereas they did not pursue individual data for every system. That said, London. I did look for the biggest ones, and look at where London is on this table. So this is 3 million and change annual riders per kilometer of route, and this is data from. So this link has been superseded. It's going to be higher ridership now. This is data from like 8 years ago, but everything else is also relevant. So New York, for example, is more than that. New York is about 1.5 times London is a couple years ago. I mean, the gap is narrowed, but not by that much, I don't think. Paris is more than twice London. Now, here's something to realize. With Paris, I can just give you my. With Paris, I could just tell you what crowding I perceived, and maybe I'm not the best judge because I work from home, so I don't usually ride rush hour. But I'll show you something about New York instead. So remember, New York has 1.5 times London's ridership per kilometer, and yes, New York also has 4 tracks, but not on the entire system, not even on most of the system. And so in New York, we actually have exact counts for passenger crowding. I mean, I imagine we also do in Paris, I just don't know them, but I know them in New York, I know them in London. This is New York. New York, on the 2nd Avenue subway peaked here. I don't imagine 2nd Avenue subway changed what happened here very much, because this is West Side, not East Side. London is much more than this. So in London, the worst lines are about 5. And I can tell you what I saw in Paris. Paris did not hit this. I have never seen anything in Paris that's as crowded as what I've seen in New York, with the exception of cascading failures on the RER. So I did take the RER quite often, actually, at rush hour, and I would peg it at in theory slightly better than this. So let's say 3.5 to 4 is my guess, but in practice worse, just because the internal passageways on the RERB, which is what I would take, these passageways were not very optimized. So you might have very bad crowding in one vestibule, while other places had more space. So the crowding, so that's the RER. The metro has much better circulation. Peg it as maybe a little bit better than New York. Reminder, this is Paris. Where is it? Here. So among the more crowded systems in the world when you measure pure ridership per kilometer, and London is less than half of that. Now, the issue is, so why is London more crowded? First of all, the trains in London, they're small, but the metro in Paris has even smaller trains. A car in London, a car in Paris, and a car on a numbered subway line in New York are about the same size. London has, I think, 7 or 8 carriages. New York 10. Paris between 5 and 8, and 8 is, I think, only in Metro Line 14. Most lines are. I think Line 1. I think at this point maybe it's extendable, but I think Line 1 is 6, not 8 cars per train. So the issue is that just as a matter of the map, London has tails. So London actually has. Actually, I can show you this map for London, just so that you can see exactly what the specific issue there. I do not know whether Tokyo is also like that. So in London you have this issue with very high crowding levels, but it's not like the crowding levels are high all the way from Amersham, or from Watford, all the way through middle class areas that are so posh. That's where I think Boris is from, either here or here. So if you want to know where the people who put party in Conservative Party live, either they're outside the city, maybe let's say Surrey or something like that, or they're here or that way. So these people, it's not like the crowding is very high here and uniform. Like the point is that the crowding in London is highly non-uniform, and so some of it is directional, which is not just London. I know that Tokyo has the same issue. Poor neighborhoods have worse crowding than rich neighborhoods. I don't know whether it's because there was historic underinvestment or because rich people moved to areas with less crowding. I do know I have a couple of friends in London who are very middle class, and specifically when they chose where to buy a house, they bought somewhere around here, specifically to be counter-directional. So the Vic, this is not even a poor and rich area, all of this is rich. So the Vic specifically has the crowding problem, which is that South London doesn't have enough tube infrastructure, and moreover, then specifically once you hit Vic, the Victoria Station, all of the people from the suburban trains who do not usually work around Victoria, they all get on these trains and then they ride up to Green Park and Ox Circus because there's just much more job density here, and this is the awful crowding direction. So this is the awful crowding, and it's always in this direction. So if you live north of city center, you have these incredibly high frequency designed to cram as much human mass as possible into these trains, but not the same human mass, so you get nice service. Again, this is not directionality because all of this is middle class. The central, so in London you have a bunch of so we have this segment which is really bad. On the central line, you likewise have from the east. So here's where we're seeing the class issue, because from the east, it's much more crowded. I believe Bethnal Green to Liverpool Street might actually be the most crowded segment of the tube in passengers per square meter. All of these really crowded segments, so this part of the Vic, this part of the central. Waterloo and City, which is very much a banker's train, they hit 5 standees per square meter, more than 5. And so the directionality is here. This is terrible, and this, I don't know if it's nice, but it's definitely better. Northern is not as bad, but it's pretty bad, and that's both sides. So bankers flip, going to bank. Bankers flip, going up to bank. As you might expect, the crowding that hits the city is worse than the crowding that hits the west side, especially on the west end, except for this one. So the point is that it's a bunch of very specific segments, but these segments are not priced higher. So tube fares are very high, don't get me wrong. London, I think, actually has the highest fares in the world. I think it's by a pretty big margin. So they're breaking even because what they're doing is they're balancing really low tail ridership on all of these suburban tales. Like if you've been to London, you know this. London is not a high density city. London is the city where the local elite kept saying things like gentlemen don't live on shelves. So instead they live in these row houses that are usually 2 stories, maybe 3. 4 is really fancy. There's the idea that you go up and down the stairs. It used to be the servants, now it's just normal people. And I mean, the idea that you would have multiple floors of one housing unit if you're middle class rather than unfathomably rich, that does not exist in Berlin. That does not exist in Paris. That does not exist in New York. In New York, if you have an internal stairway to your apartment, you have multiple floors in your apartment, it's like you're the sort of person who thinks that earning $500,000 a year would be a tragic kind of deprivation. In London, it's an ordinary middle class thing. I mean, middle class still is not ordinary in any way, shape, or form, but I mean, the middle class is not the top 2% of London. It's the top, 30%-ish of Britain, more than that of London. And again, the working class lives in the same kind of apartments, just they split with housemates. And so London is not a high density city. These are really weak tales, and then they converge at some impressively crowded things. And the fare system is still pretty normal. I mean, there are zones. The fares increase outward. Obviously, it's cheaper if you don't enter the central zone and crowd everything. But there's but they're not trying to jack up the fares. I don't know, £5 a ride within city center or something like that, just because they know that they can charge these fares, and maybe would decongest the trains from 5 centi's per square meter to 3 or something. But they're gonna earn more, so that's fine. That's not what London does. It's not revenue maximizing. It's break-even fares, and this is exactly what you also see in Asia. So you do see systems that are it's Uxbridge on the Piccadilly slash map. Okay, yeah. So so the thing is that in Asia, it's the same thing. It is expected that public transport should be profitable. And even in Singapore, so in Singapore, first of all, the fares are not especially high. The fares in Singapore, the problem is that it's difficult for me to remember the fares because I mostly remember the fares that I paid when I lived there, which was at this point over 15 years ago. These were low fares. I mean, I was paying a little bit more than the Singapore dollar, maybe $1.20, $1.30 per ride. So between the expat ghetto and the uni. And the expat ghetto is not near the uni. The expat ghetto, my home station was Orchard. Okay, question. Is this spam? I don't want to click because it is a very obstructed thing. Is this going to be a spam thing that I should be deleting? Emmy, are you real? Anyway, we'll look in a moment. But so anyway, the thing is, they're not jacking up fares on trains, even though the trains are very crowded at rush hour. When my sibling worked in Singapore, what she told me was that before Corona, there was never any room to sit, and I don't think she was going to work at 9. I think she was going to work a little later. Okay, if you're not answering, then I'm gonna assume it's just a spam. Sorry. Yeah, and I'm saying very little. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, So anyway, where was I before I did the ban? All right. So revenue maximizing fares do not exist anywhere that I know of in urban transit. I mean, even on intercity rail, we see a little bit. We see this on international trains actually. So we see Eurostar definitely is trying to maximize revenue. But for example, domestic trains, for example, the TGV practice is to be profitable, but essentially just as a break even plus a small profit. And this is, again, what we are saying in a place like Tokyo, in a place like Singapore, in a place like Taipei, in a place like Seoul. They're not trying to profit off of the riders or their constituents. They're trying to have working capital with which to operate and maintain the system without external subsidies. Subsidies may be sometimes acceptable for construction, not for operations. And so the situation is that the main question is: do you do that? Do you do something that approximates that, like in like in a bunch of northern European places? It's normal that the subway is profitable, but the rest of the system isn't. Paris, by the way, is such a place. So this is where we're starting to introduce the concept of the operating ratio or the recovery ratio. Technically, they're two different things. Fare box recovery is your ability to recover operating and capital costs from fares. Operating ratio is just operating costs. And this is an assumption that there are always going to be some kind of subsidy, so the ratio is always assumed to be less than 1. Now, ratios more than 1 exist, don't get me wrong. In Tokyo, it's much more than 1, because in Tokyo, they believe that the subway should be earning... in Japan, they believe that they should only build subways if they can pay their capital costs and operating profit within 30 years, so 3.3% return on capital. The Japanese economy does not return 3.3% on capital. But even with that requirement, and even with their current construction costs, they've stopped building subway lines. But the end of the subway construction in Japan has been very recent. The Fukutoshi line opened 13 years ago. I think Sendai has opened a line since. They're still building a little bit of regional rail in Japan. So these are lines that are definitionally getting enough money to pay a higher interest rate than the private Japanese economy. In Euroland, it's different. So usually you do see places that have break-even subways, but because of and here's the question of how it's it is connected with the other systems. At no place does, let's say, Berlin or let alone Paris say our metro is profitable. This is not because the metro is unprofitable in Paris or because the U-Bahn here is unprofitable. So if you read the correct papers on this, and I will look for it's an English language paper about Germany that I will try to post in the description. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you're watching this on Twitch, I'm not going to look for it right now. I'm sorry, but for example in Berlin, I think also in Munich, the U-Bahn is profitable. It's not profitable; it's break even. But what does this mean? Okay, in Berlin, I'm pretty sure there's an article, transport in Berlin. Yeah. Okay. So let's not do roads. Roads are for cars. By the way, this is all trips, not just work trips. Work trips, public transport is, I think, 43 maybe. So railways, and that includes trams. We have the U-Bahn and the S-Bahn, and all of these numbers are the U-Bahn and the S-Bahn. All of these numbers have increased in the last couple of years, and the trams, and the buses, and a couple of ferries that are not very important, to be honest. And they're not in Wikipedia. Okay, here's the map that I'm gonna save. Okay. So this is a combined map of both the U-Bahn and the S-Bahn. So you might notice that the tails that I was complaining about before with London, they're not U-Bahn tails, they're S-Bahn tails. The S-Bahn goes into the suburbs. The U-Bahn never does. No, at no point does the U-Bahn go into the suburbs. This is the farthest reach. This is the only place where the U-Bahn is at the edge of the city, and this is because of east-west bullshit. Essentially, it was kind of part. It was part of the program for the development of East Berlin during the Cold War. This was the only all-Eastern line, so it was developed in conjunction with an S-Bahn centric system, and they were trying to yeet people out of the central neighborhoods into modernist socialist housing projects all over here. And U7 gets kind of close, and again, it's an east-west thing. This being the west, so U7 was sent to Copiusstadt, and elsewhere the lines substituted for each other. So U3 doesn't need to go to Wannsee because the S-Bahn goes to Wannsee. U7 does go to Spandau. Again, it was a different kind of east-west bullshit, but Spandau was not the enter the city. So part of it is the U-Bahn gets the easier parts of the system, but also more importantly, the U-Bahn and the S-Bahn work as a conjoined system, as do the buses, as do the trams. So they did count. So when they so let me talk for a sec about how fare payment work and not just about the level of the fare. In Berlin, and really anywhere in Germany or Austria or Switzerland, if you want to get on a train, here's what happens. I have a ticket, which normally is printed on paper, but nowadays there's an app. There's no smartphone. With that ticket in my pocket, I walk onto the subway station. I do not pass through fare gates. I do not show my ticket to anyone. I just get on. From time to time, an inspector will come and demand that everyone on the train show their ticket. And then everyone shows their tickets, and the inspector goes away. From time to time, someone is caught without a ticket, as happened to me once actually, and then the inspector will tell them to get off the train for a secondary inspection. In my case, it was because my ticket was in the phone app, and for some reason the app wouldn't load, so I tried again, and then it loaded, and then the inspector saw that yes, I did in fact have a ticket, because it wasn't just a look for 2 seconds, but like a 30-second check. The inspector also demanded to see ID. I showed ID, and then I got on the next train. If I did not have any such ticket, then I would have been fined 60 euros. Note that at no point in this is there a precise count. So these are approximate numbers. They're derived from counts. They do counts every... So they do know the number of tickets sold. They know the ridership through audits. So they know the ridership every year. And they can even deviate between S-Bahn and U-Bahn. But there's no distinction, because there's perfect fare integration between an S-Bahn trip, an U-Bahn trip, and a transfer that uses both systems, possibly with multiple legs. And what this means is that even though you can notionally divvy up the revenue, in fact, they have to divvy up the revenue because the S-Bahn is run by a different company. It's run by Deutsche Bahn. By a branch of Deutsche Bahn, but it's the Deutsche Bahn. Whereas everything else is run by the city, by BVG. And so the way this works is they know that the BVG side of the U-Bahn breaks even. Now we know that the entire system does not. So buses are just much harder to make profitable than trains. I don't have the number of drivers in Berlin in front of me. I can check if people yell at me in comments, but in New York City, about half the half the workers on New York City Transit are buses, or people in the bus division. About half are the subway division. Obviously there are some managerial functions that are for both at the same time, but these are not that common. So nearly everyone can be designated as bus or subway, and these are 50, and you can imagine the rest are managerial things, so they're going to be proportional overhead to everything else. So let me see, where is it? Atlanta, MTA, Denver. Did I miss it? Oh, it was just the first one. I think that's because maybe they're doing it in descending order of ridership. New York, Chicago, LA, MBTA, yeah. Descending order of ridership. It used to be north to south, so. Anyway, in New York, they say unlinked, so transfers are double counted, so this is a bullshit number. The actual number is 1.7, not 2.7, because in New York, they have precise counts, because in New York, like in most cities and unlike in Germany, they have fare gates, but they don't have fare gates between different lines. So if I ride the one train to the B or D train and then to the F train, because I'm going between Morningside Heights and some part of Queens, which I did a couple times when I was living there, this would be 3 trips unlinked. But for the purpose of the system, I mean, I just swiped in at Morningside Heights and then I emerged in Jamaica, and then it's a reverse trip, so I'm 1 trip as far as everyone is concerned. So the 2.7 is a fake number and should be 1.7, but this 1.7 is still comparable to about 700. And this and this. Also, this is much longer trips. So passenger kilometers, that's not going to matter linked versus unlinked, obviously. This is in miles, but proportional. So 10.5 versus 1.5. So it's about a 7-to-1 difference. These two things are the same number of workers. And yes, the heavy rail does cost twice for 7 times the passenger kilometers, but it's the same number of workers. So this is why buses are really hard to make good financially. And please don't look at this. This is a mostly coordinated system. New York doesn't quite have perfect fare integration between buses and subways, because every bus is a swipe. The subway, the entire system is a swipe. You're allowed 2 swipes. And then it starts charging you extra unless you have a monthly. And not everyone in New York has a monthly. We will get to that in a little bit. So the entire point of this is that rail is easier to make a profit on buses. The city is easier than the suburbs, so generally subsidies go to the suburbs. The subsidies go to the suburbs and to the buses. The U-Bahn can be made profitable if you want. I mean, Berlin is not especially efficient, and it's profitable. Helsinki is actually profitable. In Helsinki, they do break down the. They might have a link on Wikipedia actually. So Helsinki Metro. Yep. So this is a yearly report from a million years ago, but they might have a more recent link. Then 2000. Why are you giving information for 2003 Wikipedia? HKL's values. You're Nordic. We don't want to hear about your values. So ridership. Oh, you're just not telling me what the total profit, because I know that for a while ago they did tell me what the profits were, and they did say that the metro was profitable and the buses and the trams were not, nor were the commuter trains. In Paris, they likewise don't break it down, and I've never seen a breakdown like for German cities. But in Paris, I'm almost certain the metro is profitable. So the thing is, the overall FAROC's operating ratio in Berlin and surroundings is 67%, so about 2/3 of the entire costs of public transport in and around Berlin are recovered by fares. In the Paris region, it's not 67%, it's 40%. But remember that includes suburbs. Paris has a lot of them. And look at this table. Metro, but yes. Berlin's gonna be here, right? Right? Did just not post Berlin because of reasons. I know I looked, so I mean, so if I overlooked Berlin, this is not because of. Yeah, because in Berlin, uh, oh, because okay, okay. So anyway, here's Munich, which is also which is included and is not on the, and it's about half as crowded as Paris. Not crowded in the sense of passenger crowding, but in the sense relevant to the thing. And let's do Berlin U-Bahn. I mean, if I were updating this post, I would obviously include Berlin because I do have this annual data. Okay, so we're saying 553.1. 3.6. Okay, so we have half the ridership per kilometer of Paris. We break even. Paris has the same cost per car kilometer as Berlin. Cars in Paris are actually, yeah, no, they're not smaller. I think they're the same size. So, yeah, no, so in Paris the metro has to be profitable. We're just not talking about this way because again, it is part of a combined system. Fares. I'm not even talking about different models of fare integration because there's one model of fare integration, which is uh, all fares are mode neutral. Transfers are always free. If it's run by different agencies, then you establish a fare union, like Kessler would. This is the only way. So, but fare levels vary between things that just want to make everything profitable, things that only want to make certain core segments profitable, things that try to have small amounts of subsidy, like I mean, when you're trying to do 40% fare box recovery, that's not a lot. I mean, it's not a small subsidy. That's 10 billion euros a year in operating expenses, of which 4 are recovered by fares. But remember, most of the rest are things that are treated as social services, like the 4 billion in Paris out of the 10 that generate the revenue. I'm not going to say that the 4 is where all the ridership is, but the majority of the ridership is on the 4 and not on like the things that are generating not as much revenue. I mean, remember the metro in Paris has more ridership than the RL. And the buses within the city might as well not exist. So there is a question of whether you have, but that's a question of fares. It's not like the fares in Paris are unusually low or anything. It's just in Paris in addition to the useful services, they keep the social, I don't want to call them social services. Let's call them the pseudo social services. The services that exist because people want to say that they're nice and they want to talk about how every suburb is accessible by a bus and maybe the bus even comes every hour or better, but nobody actually rides that bus, and the actual social services people use are very different. Like, I mean, do you know what mode of transport is used by the working class in the Paris suburbs? It's the metro or the inner RER lines. You know, the RERB, maybe the eastern segments of A, Metro 12. It's the one that everyone complains is more black people than they expect in Paris. Metro 4, Metro 7, Metro 5, things like that. Metro 13. It's not whatever social service bus the city thinks is, or the suburbs think is important. But again, that's not a fair question. It's a very different question. And but there is still a range of how much you want to subsidize the system. So there has to be a fare. The question is how much. And now we're talking about. So I said at the beginning, fares, fare systems, and fare payment tech. So fare systems include things like not just the level of the fare, which has been set based on a certain operating ratio, but also things like how do you distribute the fare. So again, you have an integrated system, but how? And this is where you're starting figuring out how fares depend on distance. And here we're seeing a divergence between two complete systems that I wish could be combined, but I don't think they can. Which I'm going to call the Asian system and the European system, even though the Asian system is not in all of Asia and the European system is not in all of Europe. So the Asian system is that fares depend on distance. And if you want them to be mode neutral, which they are in Singapore and I think nowhere else, unfortunately, then you just set a certain distance, a certain table of distances, and the fares between any 2 points with that distance. There's something in Japan called ARCs that I was told on Twitter I should mention by one of my mutuals. That they have this. Let me see if I can. Not ARCs. ARCs. Maybe not. Oh no, the ARC system is not Japan. It's not Japanese. It was an American thing. It was done. Oh, that was the thing. Chicago Rail and Fair ARCs. So the ARC was something that. Why are you showing? Okay, so this is the thing that was told to. So this is. Okay, so that is not a fair system. That is something different, and I'm going to go back to this in a bit. I thought this was something else. Okay, this explains why I could not find it before, because I was looking for something different. Okay, that explains. So anyway, the Asian system is that. Are you talking about IC cards? No, no. This discussion is gonna fit into that, but no, I'm not talking about fair payment. I'm talking about fair systems. So. And again, we'll talk about the payment tech in a sec. So with the system, what I mean is, how do you distribute the fares? So the Asian system, again, it's roughly distance-based. There are metro systems that use that. Not even in Tokyo. In Tokyo, the metro system uses a slightly different system that's much more degressive. I do not remember if it's integrated with the buses. In Singapore, it is because it's just one city state. And they went integrated a few years after I left. Jarrett Walker was already blogging about this and about the trade-offs involved in transitioning, because when I lived in Singapore, the buses were cheaper than the MRT. I think fares were integrated in the sense that you would pay the higher rate, so the MRT rate, maybe MRT plus a little extra. You would not pay the exact sum of the two things. So they were not perfectly competing. They were often the same companies that just charged you extra for transfers because they did not think. And so there's the issue of integration, but that's solved. What I mean by Asian system is, again, that you set a rate, and despite calling it the Asian system, I'm actually going to show you something from ZBB actually, and I'm going to. Is it here? No, it is not. So I'm gonna. So the problem is that I don't want to show you guys the. So it will be here, I guess, because the. Again, I was getting it from history or getting it from TM DMs, and I do not want to show you guys TM DMs. I want to say it's confidential, but it's not confidential in the cloak and dagger sense. It's just not confidential of random banter between me and Ethan Fenlon. It's supposed to be page 65. So this is for the Regionalbahn, let me move myself for a sec. So this is for the Regionalbahn, because the city and the inner suburbs on the S-Bahn are on a different system, but you can literally see the distance fare. And this is kind of not very granular because it's part of an intercity system because the suburban stuff is on a different system. So essentially, the system would be the Asian system would be to do this, but at the local level. So this is around 15-ish cents, euro cents per kilometer. It's actually a pretty high rate. The intercities in Germany charge about 11 euro cents per kilometer. And that's actually a pretty decent rate to charge, to be honest. I mean, if you don't want to be too aggressive, then probably, yeah, about 15 US cents ish per kilometer, so 15 yen, 11-ish euro cents. Yeah, and that actually scales both up and down really well. And that assumes that said that, and by the way, I said the S1 is different. This is the S1 system. So ABC is. Oh no, that might still be something different, right? Because that is right. Because this is this is the S1 system, Berlin. Because that would be this is for fares for trams and such within small cities within the region. So Brandenburg, Frankfurt, Anderode, and Cottbus. And then Potsdam is on a very similar system to these, but the fares differ by a little bit for reasons beyond my ken. And then Berlin is much higher fares than these because it's a bigger city. So here it's so these are for very short trips. And Berlin, ABC is outside the city, so these are quite long trips. But again, this would be the European system, in which the German system is the probably or the Swiss system even more so, where yeah, these are the fares. They're zonal. They're not distance based. You can be so in Berlin, the zones are very, of course, there's zone A, zone B, zone C, and fares are for a minimum of 2 zones. Some places do silly one zone tickets, like London, which has 9 covering Greater London and suburbs. Munich, I think, has 16 zones. Zurich has many zones, but they're not concentric, so it's not 16 circles or anything like that. It's the city zone, the airport zone, the Winterthur zone. Forgetting the names of the other Zurich suburbs. Then, so first of all, it's zonal. Second, more importantly, it's based on monthly passes. So yeah, in theory, in Berlin, if I ride within the city, I pay 280, but no, I actually don't. First of all, if I ride more than once, I will get a 4th trip for 9 euros, which is what I did before I got a monthly. But really, I will just get a monthly. So I don't want to 10 Uhr Karte. 10 Uhr, so there are some complications. Let me move my face. So there's some complications. So one of the complications we have in the European system, which again is really a German, Austrian Swiss thing, is they give you lower price tickets that are not valid at rush hour, which is kind of like the way they're doing rush hour pricing. So some places have extra fares at rush hour, some don't. This might actually be orthogonal to European versus Asian system, certainly orthogonal to Europe versus Asia. And some people think that they're good, some think they're bad. I am generally against, but that's because I like simple things. And I'm very against it when I'm against high construction costs. So the way this is done the way this is done here is that they have subsidized. They have cheaper tickets, but only if you're not allowed to ride at rush hour. So it's called the 10-hour, the 10 o'clock ticket, or sometimes the 9 o'clock ticket, i.e., ticket that's only valid from 10 o'clock in the morning to the end of the day. So you can ride in the afternoon rush, but not in the Morning Rush. It's intended for the use of people who will never ride. Actually, I might be part of the use case. I just don't like the restriction. Is this the real one? Why are you making me tilt my head like this? It's not nice. Okay, none of these numbers seem correct. Yeah, maybe this was correct in 2018 when this was published. 81, but nowadays I'm paying 86 for this, not 81. Gonna give you a few seconds to tilt your heads as well and see this. No, that's a normal monthly. And so the point is, based on this, it's 81 for a monthly versus 280 would really 225 for not a monthly. So it's 36 rides make you a monthly, and this is on the high side by the standards of the German-speaking world. In Zurich, I think it's 20, maybe 21. In Zurich, they really want everyone to be on monthlies, so they will jack up the prices like crazy if you're not on a monthly. And the point is that so this is also related to our lack of fare barriers. Now, a lot of these elements are implemented in places that do have fare barriers, like Stockholm, like Paris. But the point is that there are no fare barriers, so you want to incentivize passengers to pay. Now, if I need to pay every time I board, the fare barriers stop me if I'm not paying. There are no fare barriers. I have dodged the fare in Berlin, I think 4 times since I moved here. And I know this just by parity because I see, oh wait, maybe I know I'm not going to ride a lot this month, maybe because of Corona, because whatever. So let's get 4 tickets. Wait, if I'm getting tickets in 4s, then I should always have an even number of tickets left when I get back home, but I only have an odd number right now, so I must have forgotten. This happens. It doesn't happen a lot. It's not the majority of fare dodging in Berlin. Fare dodging is between 2 and 4%, and I have dodged the fare a lot less than that in my trips here. I don't even know how many transit trips I've taken in Berlin, right? I mean, I've been here almost 3 years, but I mean, most of the period that I've lived in Berlin was the period of Corona. I don't know, do I ride 50 times a month in a normal month, maybe 40 something times a month? Maybe I've actually taken it's possible I've taken 1,000 trips. If not, it's not, I mean, I'm well over 500, right? And I've dodged a fare, I believe, 4 times. So so one way you prevent that from happening, and also people who might consciously dodge the fare, you incentivize them not to do that by encouraging them to use monthlies. The monthlies also are for people who try to minimax this, so maybe only ride, maybe only pay when at times when they think it's a high chance. I mean, I have been in meetup in a bunch of groomers when people say, "Oh, don't worry if your battery is only if your battery is almost dead. It's after midnight nobody checks the fares." Like, people think that way. I mean, I've met people who try to give me tips on how to forge an Anmeldung. So if it's a monthly pass, then it's much harder to mini-max this, and this is also why you have to prepay the monthly. And so you want, again, a low multiplier of the monthly over single ride. 36 is kind of the upper limit. In the United States, they go for much higher numbers. In New York, it's, I believe, 46 or 47. In Paris, the city, it's very high because in Paris, one of the social ways they try to subsidize poor people, not very successfully, is by having flat region-wide monthlies. So In Berlin, I pay 86 euros, and that gives me access to the entire city. If I wanted access to the nearby suburbs, I would have to pay a little bit extra. Forgetting how much, I think about 100. Not 100 extra, 100 total. In Paris, at the time I lived there, maybe they've hacked the fare since then a little bit. It was 75.30 for the entire region. However, the single ride fares, or the carnets of 10 tickets, these were zonal. These are zonal. So in the city, you pay, again at the time, maybe they've hiked since, 149 per trip. Not 150, but 149 because you pay 10, because you pay 14.90 and get 10 of these. And the monthly is 75.30. In the suburbs, you pay so 50.5, which is terrible. In the suburbs, you pay the same 75.30 for a monthly, but then single trip is maybe €3, so then you're incentivized to do that. And so you want really low, and in the suburbs also in Paris, they don't have fare gates for the most part. So it works really well without fare gates. The steep monthly discounts, they reduce transaction costs because you don't need to buy the things. These are also things that were developed before smart cards. With smart cards, the transaction costs are very low, even on an ongoing basis. I was told that the collection costs in London are 4%, maybe even less. And London is not a city with prepaid passes. This is important. You can, I think, get a monthly, but I don't think most people get a monthly. Now, in London, they have this thing called fare capping, which Americans think is the best thing since sliced bread. It's rather terrible, like sliced bread, to be honest. And what's so the idea of the fare cap is that instead of having prepaid weeklies and monthlies, it's not even monthlies. It's something that they do weeklies, and in New York they're implementing that as well, only for weeklies, because they're reproducing a very specific pathology of 2000s era London tech, where the system will just remember that you swiped a certain number of times, and then if you've swiped enough times, the amount of money you've spent in the month counts as you're having, or in the week in London or New York, it would be more than the weekly pass. Then it just stops charging you. So it's a cap rather than a prepaid pass, which is usually justified on the most obnoxious and wrong grounds ever. Like generally in America, if you see people justify things too much on grounds of equity, they're bullshitting you. I mean, all of these policies are equity neutral. So this is where you're seeing managers who've clearly never been poor, who clearly never talked to any member of the working class except in focus groups, thinking that poor people are all day laborers who can pay $275 for a subway ticket every time, and but cannot pay $127 for a monthly. And that's bullshit, because the working class does not work as day laborers. It's very uncommon. Over here, you get paid monthly, and you also get paid at the end of the month, but it doesn't matter. In America, you don't get paid monthly. I believe you get paid every 2 weeks. It's much more normal, but okay, so you do a 14-day ticket. But also, I mean, if you're getting paid in a lump every 14 days, you can budget a monthly pass. I mean, there's this idea that there's this idea in Middleborough opinion in the United States that poor people can't do finance. There's a scene, for example, I think in Hillbilly Elegy of all things, aka middle class people with grown middle class, but met a poor person once and decided that they're icky. So a book by such a person, written for such people, that has a scene where the supposed hillbillies go fill up their car with gas, and but Hillbilly Elegy is not left. I mean, the guy's running for the Republican primary for the Ohio Senate. His patron is Peter Thiel. He's a VC working for he's a VC who's been I believe has been funded or working for a VC funded by Peter Thiel. So it's middle ground opinion. It's not just left. It's the entire mentality that poor people are like children who need the state to act as their absent parent, rather than just people who don't have money and need the state to give them work, and if there's no work, then money. So the idea is that they fill up their and unfortunately, because of American soft power, Hillbilly Elegy was listed by our current chancellor as one of his influences. He listed a bunch of books, none of them written by any person who is or cares about immigration. So I mean, it's not all none of his books written by immigrants, because he cited Branko Milanovic on inequality, and Branko Milanovic is an immigrant. He's a Serbian immigrant to the United States. However, Branko, I mean, I love Branko. He is disconnected from the immigrant experience. The way he talks about immigration is very much like how someone who doesn't move in very immigration-heavy circles talks. But anyway, so anyway, the point is, these people in Hillbilly Elegy, I will get to you in a sec. With Hillbilly Elegy, the point is that they're trying to fill up their car with gas. And then they try to pay with a debit card or a credit card, and the card gets rejected because they don't have enough money in their bank account, and it's bullshit. If you have, let's say, $23.72 to your name, you know that you have $23.72 to your name, to the exact count, and when you shop for groceries, you will compute this, and you will find out how to add. In New York, it would be 8.875%. In another American state, in Appalachia, it would probably be less. And you'd add up that number on top to know that you will have groceries that you can pay for with your card that has $23.72 to your name. And that's, again, even with groceries, even with American supermarkets doing the asshole thing of listing the price before tax. So you don't just add up numbers, but also have to add a tax on top that will not be a round number on top of numbers that are usually not round to begin with. So exact coins is not about this. So there are two issues here: exact and coin. These are two separate issues. Coin versus note is because they sometimes automate the collection. There's a fare box where you dump money, and they don't want. And in New York, what they do is they use a suction system to avoid having to manually empty it. And the suction system doesn't work with notes, only with coins. I do not know whether they use such a suction system elsewhere. I'm forgetting whether you could ever pay with coins on the bus in Singapore. But also, it's usually the United States is kind of unusual in that the dollar, the dollar is a bill and not a coin. Here, I mean, the coins go. I mean, here, this is a coin, and €2 is also a coin. And the second issue is exact, which is that they don't want the bus driver to have to handle change. It is time consuming, and maybe that's another system they have to layer. It does sometimes exist in Israel. The bus driver, I don't know whether now, but 20 plus years ago, the bus driver in Israel would give you change. There was the system where you paid. Let's say the fare would be, I don't know, 7 shekels, and you would put in a coin, and you put in a 10 shekel coin. There's a system, so that coin falls into the slot of the 10 shekel coins, and then there's the slot of the 1 shekel coin, and 3 1 shekel coins will drop from there. So that is a thing that exists, or at least historically in my lifetime existed in Israel. It did not exist in Singapore, which a pair of total shitheads who were professors, who were Israeli communications professors who sabbaticaled in Singapore and wrote a book called Hachita Singaporeet, the Singaporean Enigma, which is a horrifically Orientalist thing about how Singapore, which they portray as an uncreative culture, could ever achieve anything. So they portray the lack of change as some kind of Singaporean harshness, some kind of usually presented in the and as opposed to not even the Thatcherite thing, just as oh my god, these people hate other people. They the buses don't give you change, and when I accidentally overpaid, people behind me snickered. Which again is something that exists in New York as well. So again, it's just a matter of do they have the system for giving change or not. That's part of a fair system, by the way. Do they have a system for giving change? Normally, I don't think it's very common, but I also have not ridden buses in Europe very much because I have trains. In the US, I did ride buses. I don't recall ever getting change on them. In Canada, I don't remember. Because I stopped paying with coins. In general, by the way, another important trend is that they try to make you not give money to the driver. So you have to pay with a card, and then you can buy the card somewhere, often not on the bus. You can buy it at a subway station, you could buy it at a convenience store. In Vancouver, for example, you cannot get the monthly pass or books of tickets on the bus. That's not a product that's being sold on a bus. When I lived there, this was before the Compass card was around. The way you could do it is by buying a monthly or a book of 10 tickets at a pharmacy, which is what I did. I don't think you get it monthly even at a SkyTrain station, which was weird and stupid, but you could get, I actually don't remember if you could even get the books of 10 tickets at a station. I think it's possible that the fare machines at the stations will only sell you one ticket at a time. Again, Vancouver is being stupid. Like, if you want a good system, you always want to make sure that the standard way to ride must be available at least every rapid transit station. If you can also make it at every surface transit station, like at Zurich, where you can actually buy where they have a full-size fare vending machine with the ability to buy a monthly at every tramway stop, then that is nice. But definitely, it's a must to have every rapid transit station, which they do in Berlin. So in Berlin, I'm giving you a preview of fare payment. So let's actually complete this thought and go into fare payment. So in Berlin, you can pay by app. Because I'm using the inbuilt microphone, which has more background noise but does not randomly go off, so I can stop my phone from. I don't need to gaze at Twitch on the phone to make sure that. So. Right. So the thing is, I do not want. Okay. So look. So we have this BVG app, which. At any rate. Okay, like this. Can you guys see, or is it too glary? Because on OBS I'm seeing a smaller thing and it's very glary. So anyway, you have a bunch of tickets and you could buy them on the app, and I can buy a monthly on the app, which I did in fact. I still have a valid monthly, and the way this works is my phone is the ticket, so I show the QR code to instead of a paper ticket to an inspector, and this is good. The kind of global standard is to have a smart card. Northern Europe resists that. So in Asia, because they did not bother to fair integrate until past smart cards, they already had smart cards, so they could already do, and they already had fare gates at every rail station. So you have fare gates, you have distance-based fares. You don't really have monthlies. In Singapore, there's technically a nationwide, aka citywide monthly, but even which is flat rather than distance-based. But even on the longest trip that's possible within Singapore, I think the multiplier is like 60 as opposed to our 36. So you would never do it. In Tokyo, they do actually have monthlies with very nice discounts with their station to station. So if so I can get a monthly that gets me between, I don't know, Tachikawa and Tokyo. I do not even know whether I can do subsegments. So if I have a Tachikawa to Tokyo monthly, Borners, let me know. If I live in Tachikawa and I work in Marunouchi and I have a monthly that gets me on JR that gets me between Tachikawa and Tokyo, can I use it for subsegments? So can I use it to travel on the entire Chuo line between Tokyo and Tachikawa? Like if I want to stop on the way in Shinjuku, can I do that? Or do I need to buy separate tickets? Because what you definitely can't do is do nearby trips. So so I think the metro is a little different from this, but certainly the commuter trains, like I mean, oh, it's all line inclusive. So if I have, so Tachikawa to Tokyo also gets me between Kokubunji and I don't know and Iidabashi. I guess Iidabashi is a different Chuo line, but it's still Chuo line. But definitely you can't. But what we can't do is do nearby things like I don't think you can. Yeah, but you can't deviate, right? So if I live in Tachikawa and instead of going to Shinjuku, I want to go to Shibuya, I will have to pay a separate ticket to go to go to Shibuya, right? For people who who have not memorized the system. Transport in Greater Tokyo. Um, so this is the Chuo line. Tachikawa is the branch point. Shinjuku, Tokyo, Yamanote line. This is Shibuya. So I'm asking whether I can do this on a ticket that does this to me. Yeah. So you'd pay extra, right? So the issue is that these are monthlies that are kind of only on a line, whereas these are also different operators that are not fare integrated. So for example, you actually have to pay a separate fare, as I understand. And if you're going, let's say, on Tokyo, so this is so you go on this line. This is the Denentoshi line, and then it runs through the Hanzomon line because Tokyo likes doing this kind of through surface, which is very good. And I believe you actually have to pay extra if you go between the Denentoshi line, if you go across, and then the line emerges in, I believe, Oshiaga, and then connects to Tobu, and then you'd have to pay a third fare. Oh, so these are integrated, but these aren't. Oh, okay. Okay. Oh, so it means so. Oh, so when you say Keisei to Keisei JR, this means that it means that on the same monthly, I can go for, so the same on the same monthly between Chiba and Tokyo, I can do this or this. Really? I thought it was a single operator. Oh, good. But anyway, they're not quite zonal. I mean, it's not like, I mean, so again, it's hard to say because I mean, what's the zone on the Chua? I mean, all competition, but with concentric zones, I mean, it just gives you a lot more leeway. So in that case, so this is why I was asking about Shibuya or Ikebukuro. Oh, it's still point to point. Yeah, okay. So yeah, so that's the problem. Yeah. Um, so I don't know how common it is to take a commuter pass, to be honest, but it's not something that's very flexible, whereas here it's flexible. I mean, I have ticket valid in the entire city because they realize that if I'm doing a leisure trip, which is not my normal beat, I'm not doing this at rush hour. I'm doing this at a time when the trains are not crowded, at a time where my main concern right now is sitting. So in Berlin, we have a mixture of trains with normal subway seating, so facing sideways, long benches, or commuter seating, so seats that face forward and backward, and it's combined European style or American style. European style is two seats facing two seats, so family style. The American way is airline style, uh, or rather airline style with half the seats facing backward because they don't uh, reset. And so just to put things in perspective, what the ridership here is off peak, and this is observations on interwave, because when there are lockdowns, I mean, where would they even go? So, or lockdowns, very mild social distancing. And when, but even before Corona, if it was not rush hour and I was going to a gaming group or to a queer meetup, and I would take the train at, let's say, 7 in the evening, uh, usually, so not only would I always be able to find a seat, and all of this is traveling in Meta, it's not just because it's the suburbs now, it's Meta. Not only is there always a seat, generally my concern is finding a forward-facing seat because I get motion sick if I face backward. I would rather stand and face backward. And often, maybe not before Corona, but certainly between the Corona waves, I would find a seat that not only faces forward, but is not sitting near anyone else. So family style four seats where it's not common to find such a thing where none of the four seats is occupied, but something where only one of the four seats is occupied and it's facing backward, that often exists. Just to put things in perspective for you for what the crowding level is at 8 in the evening. Again, some trains are very crowded. There are trains that have standees. Usually, it's not actually not at 8, but maybe more at 9:30, which is right after they go from 5 minutes between trains to 10 minutes. But or usually when there's or usually maybe not now, but both before Corona and then in the few summer months when all the clubs were open, there was a very prominent peak. Let me just say that because I live near KitKat, I would say this, and it's at, let's say, 10 or 11 at night. There was a very prominent peak on U8 to not an actual job center, but to KitKat weekend nights. Because it was so obvious where people were going from, let's say, how they were dressed, I could literally direct them and say, oh yeah, I live here. This is the exit that you want to take to KitKat. But that's very uncommon. Usually, off-peak ridership just does not load the trains. So it's one of these kind of, so in some way that a very large discount for monthly passes, one of its functions beyond reducing transactions back when that was a significant cost, discouraging casual or accidental fare beating when you don't have what's it called, when you don't have fare gates, encouraging ridership. It's another really important function, which is it reduces the marginal cost to zero. So when you make a very small decision, that's definitely a thing. I mean, in Stockholm, I walk to work and I didn't have a monthly because it was Paris style, so flat monthlies are prohibitively expensive in the city. I mean, 75/30 is not prohibitively expensive, but it's not something that you would get. You would do paper ride. It was a thing where I would walk several kilometers if I wanted to get hummus. Why? Because my calculus was this. I'm paying 75, maybe 95 kronor for the if I'm walking there, yeah, I like walking through the city. If I'm taking the subway, then yeah, it's much shorter, but the subway costs me extra, so suddenly it's not a 75 kroner or 95 kroner, depending on what I'm getting with it. It's not a 75 kroner meal, it suddenly becomes a 125 kroner meal. And maybe I don't want to spend 125 kroner on food. That was literally a calculation that I was making in either model choice or in deciding where to go, whether to take the trip. If I didn't feel like walking, I would just find something in Roslagsted and not at the southern end of Södermalm, aka literally the other end of central Stockholm. So the monthly works to encourage these kinds of trips, and this is very important. And I can't quite compare Japan with Europe on this. I can't compare anywhere in Asia with Europe on this, and the reason is that Japan is multi-operator, and so trip counts are unlinked across operators, which means that if I'm doing this trip from the Den-en-toshi line through the Hanzomon line, let's say for some reason I don't work in Tokyo, but like or slightly farther, let's say Oshiaga, but rather just farther out in the Toba line. This is I count as 3 trips. Let's say from here to here, that is 3 trips. So the numbers are going to be kind of fake, so it's difficult to exactly gauge this. So we can get trip to work model splits. That's very easy because in Japan, like in normal countries such as Japan, Singapore, Korea, US, Canada, if you count them as normal, but you shouldn't, Britain, Australia, France. I think in all of these they report model splits by work trip. Oh, Malaysia also, but that's not normal either. They suck. No, seriously, the KL model split is horrendous. So these places report model split for work trips. Germany, Switzerland. I think Austria does both. But Germany, Switzerland, Sweden. I think Italy, the Netherlands. Forgetting what Belgium does and forgetting what Spain does. All of these places report all trips. But you can get work trips if you really want. So, like my contention is that model split for work trips is kind of like the metric to aim to maximize the level of policy, just because it's much harder to game on questions like what is a trip, what do you do when you trip chain, so there's a difference that I do not know what Asia is like. Is the thing that, as I'm going to say. The ridership, this blog post, where on the right end, where you can have the 2 numbers to compare are New York and Berlin, or New York and Vienna. So the model split in and around Berlin is around 35% for work trips. New York is 31%, so we're basically the same. Yeah, we're better than the Americans, but not by that much. And the hamburgers are actually worse than the New Yorkers. So sugar being weird with how this is computed, so don't look at that. But Hamburg, Berlin, and then New York. So New York is half as many trips per person in Berlin, and yes, in Berlin the U and S-Bahn trips are unlinked between each other, but that is not what the difference comes from. The difference is that people here take the trains off peak so much more than in New York. Again, I do not know where Asia is in this, because the data that I have is not good enough for this, and the reason, again, is because Singapore still has a lot of legacy bus ridership. Tokyo is multi-operator. I think Seoul is also multi-operator. And Seoul also has a ton of legacy bus ridership. Seoul has shocking little subway ridership. Seoul has this is a cool thing that used to have or might still have. I mean, they're not going to be updated now because Corona, but this is rough ridership for every rapid transit system in the world. Um, this is so Seoul. I think it's missing a little bit, but it's not missing that much. This is a metro area of 26 million people. So if you take this number as real, and I think it's wrong, but I don't think it's very wrong. Like I don't think it's four. I'm pretty sure the first digit is correct. Okay, it's not going to be 4K. Maybe it's 3.6, 3.7. Anyway, 133, and this is a metro area where I saw the model split. It's 50%. And it's 50% that's somehow, and it's a ratio that's worse than New York City because New York City has 3/4 of that, but it's 31%. Again, it's not because nobody rides in Seoul off-peak, though it's because in Seoul there's still a lot of legacy bus ridership. So again, I can't compare whether the Asian system is just worse than the European system, which again, I'm saying European system, for something that is in its purest form a German-speaking world thing. Whether it's worse at generating off-peak ridership, I do not know. I do think that the lack of fare barriers here is helpful in reducing operating costs, and I think that the monthlies are a lot more convenient. But again, that's systems. And again, it's related to the technology. So we're behind in the technology, so you absolutely can do the system with smart cards. You don't need to. Germany resists smart cards. I cannot tell if it's a matter of avoiding surveillance tech, except that the phones have equal amounts of surveillance, and we have CCTV cameras on the U-Bahn trains, like I live in London. And I mean, what we don't have is that. So, in London, they like using the smart card for surveillance because the UK is the country that produced 1984. And yes, 1984 was intended as a warning. However, it matters, I think, that the most spectacular part of 1984, the part that people remember, the part that people quote. I mean, it's not the part, it's two parts. The first is specific expressions of propaganda. Like the word that is not quite, so the word doublespeak is from almost there, i.e. the word doublespeak, I do not remember if it was ever used by Orwell. It is emphatically not a word from 1984, but it is a word that was used as a clone from 1984. The word 1984 is doublethink. And the word speak is used with other things in 1984. Like doublespeak was very clearly patterned on 1984. The idea of, so Orwell was very interested in propaganda and wrote a lot about propaganda. And I mean, Winston Smith works for the Ministry of Truth. He does not, for example, work for the Ministry of Plenty. So the book is not about the logistics of how Oceania half-starves its population or how it creates shortages for non-party members. He does not work at the Ministry of War. It does not discuss how Oceania fights a forever total war. And it's always been at war with East Asia or Eurasia, but the fact that they keep saying, oh, we've always been at war with Eurasia or East Asia, so again, it's the propaganda and the surveillance, so the big brother is watching you. These are the things that Britain took from this, and again, I mean, there were many, and there's so much literary canon about communism, most of which was written by people who actually lived there. But again, in British culture, what they think of is the surveillance, because that's what they do. They don't think about, for example, in Solzhenitsyn, in A Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, there's the scene that explains how he became a prisoner in the Gulag, and the answer is he was a completely ordinary Soviet citizen who ended up behind enemy lines in the war and fought in the partisans and fought the Nazis as a partisan. And just as a reminder, partisans was specifically a term for communist and communist allied resistance, not for, let's say, anti-communist ones, which as you can imagine, existed in, let's say, Lithuania and so on. And however, there was a lot of suspicion of anyone caught behind enemy lines. Why didn't they sacrifice themselves for the cause? And if they did not have enough people vouching for them, then they were sent to the Gulag. This was a very important, let's say, Soviet experience of Soviet oppression, i.e., our own. The idea is, oh, it's our own patriotic citizens who fought the enemy, and at no point, and didn't even fight the enemy while trying to be allied to an anti-communist thing, and yet they're treated like enemies. Whereas the British experience of, let's say, a foreign fighter with an anarchist militia in Spain is the existence of phone surveillance, which Britain was doing at the exact same time. So anyway, Britain is a surveillance state. Britain is the place where TfL, as a crime-stopping measure, tells people that if they witness a crime on the bus, they should file a report with the police, and as a helpful thing to help the police locate the criminal, they should tell the police their own Oyster card number. Why? Because when you tap on the bus, and this is something, remember, on the bus, the way the system works is always you pay on the bus, unless it's a specific Latin American BRT where they're doing metro imitation, but first world BRT implementations don't do that. So on the subway, you pay at the station, right? So I get at the station, unless it's a very simple station, it is unclear what train I took from there. And it's maybe not clear what train I got on, right? Because let's say, again, it's especially true if it's a large complex station as opposed to my home station, which is very small. Let's say that we were Paris and not Berlin, so there's where should I even say? Let's say I lived in Paris. Okay, let's say I live in Paris. I still live in Paris. I live at Nation, so large complex station. I insert a card or tap my Navigo if I have a monthly, and then I cross the fare barrier. What train did I take? Never mind that there are 5 different lines at, let's say on the metro level, on 4 different lines at Nation. Did I just miss my train, or did I just make it? So again, much harder to contain, whereas on the bus, I pay on the bus. I mean, maybe I don't pay the driver directly, maybe if it's proof of payment, then I tap at any entrance, but it's known what bus I took, and it will be logged, and it will be given as analytics to bus planners who sometimes insist that they need this information. They really don't. And so just so you know, I did the Brooklyn bus redesign proposal with Eric without ever having looked at the data that's more granular than how many people ride each bus route on an average weekday. I did not do any point-to-point. That's not necessary. I did look at job data. I did look at land use. I did not look at point-to-point. You don't need that. But some planners incorrectly think that you need that because if the surveillance is viewed as an option, then they will take it. It's very mission creep style. So anyway, if you go to the police and say, "Hi, I'm Oyster card number 1488 69420," then they can see what buses you rode. Then if you say, "I witnessed a crime," they will be able to see what bus you rode, right? Because I told them, "Hi, I'm Alon Levy, Oyster card," and they show them my Oyster card number 1488 69420, and then they will say, "Okay, Alon rode I guess in Britain they would say Mr. Levy, right? Because they're turfs, they don't say Mex. Mr. Levy, I'm sorry, Mr. Levy, he, and then I correct again, Mr. Levy, he rode the bus, bus number 1888, and these are the other people who wrote it, so then they can see who fits their profile as a criminal. Maybe I also tell them pertinent facts of the crime that they witnessed, and then they will know, and then based on whatever, they will know who their suspects are. So this is, again, very normalized in Britain. Here, we pretend we care about privacy. And by we pretending that you care about privacy, I mean they do a lot of two-factor authorization and other things that are designed for professional Linux hackers and not for the general public. And also, we don't do this kind of surveillance of passengers, which is a positive thing. Again, it is not necessary. It's just data that's out there to be stolen and to be used to harass random people. Again, if I'm slagging on Orwell, Orwell was low-key racist. He even tried to portray his own racism as like something that makes him more in touch with ordinary people than people who he claims do not emotionally know what it feels to salute the Union Jack and to hate the Jews. And so part of the experience of authoritarianism is, or even like the kinds of authoritarian things that democracies do, so these kind of surveillance things or police brutality, these are very racialized things. These are things that are like part of the experience, and again, something that Oceania does not have. Oceania, the text tells us, is an egalitarian place that promotes Jews and black people. And so the actual experience is, yeah, someone with a name like Eric Blair is not gonna get nabbed by this, but someone with a name like, I don't know, Benga something will, or someone with a name like Khan will. And so this is again, I mean, it's not like Britain, so bear in mind, it's part of a thing. I mean, it's part of a system. In Britain, the system does not have a lot of police brutality. But they do have harassment, and it's so one of the ways we deny this kind of surface area to the parts of the state that engage in too much harassment and providing services is that is unnecessary. So no, you don't need that kind of surveillance, and that's another reason why you shouldn't have fare gates. But again, this is not. But there's something you could do with smart cards. I mean, with a smart card, the non-surveillance part of a smart way to do a smart card is I have a smart card in the same way that on my phone I have a monthly pass. I can have a smart card just carried. I don't have to tap. In Paris, actually, smart cards are not required to be tapped if there's no fare gate. So in Paris, the smart cards are only for monthlies, not for single trips. And if I have a monthly, then something I would do all the time is because I lived in the city, and I would commute to EHS, which is in the suburbs, specifically without fare gates. So here's how it would work, and it's not me not understanding the system because I got nabbed by fare control very often, and it always passed, right, because I had a valid ticket. And my ticket was always valid. So the way it works is, if there's a fare gate, it will open the fare gate for me. And if there's no fare gate, I do not need to do anything. I don't need to validate. Now, Americans copied the British surveillance state idea and have their own ideas of American surveillance. So Americans think that even if you have a monthly pass, they will still require you to tap. This is an important part of the implementation in Boston, for example. And people constantly tell me, yeah, we need this for planning. And I keep asking them, okay, tell me what piece of information that gives you that. I mean, yes, I know the information, right? Tell me what this piece of information that gives you, what insights you can learn from it for how to plan your transit system that you would not know otherwise. And the answer is, and they never give me such a thing because there's no benefit to it. It's just hassle for the sake of hassle. So again, smart cards are not bad. You can do smart card payment, you can do phone payment, you can do whatever. Just do not make people who have monthlies tap. This is just very hostile user interface. It is done often in the United States because the United States has awful user interface for dealing with the public. And I say this as a German who lives in Germany. And I not only live in Germany, I live in Germany in the weirdest use case ever, which is someone who is an immigrant, but is a natural-born German citizen, which is something that's very difficult because a lot of the documents that you get are things that involve either naturalization or having grown up in the country. So here's an example. They need 1 sec to find. This is a passport. This is an electronic passport. You can see this. This means it's electronic. It's scannable. We have an app that lets you auto scan your ID with a code. It does not work with the passport, and I never got the code. Now, I voted with the passport. I go to government offices that assume you have ID, and I show them my passport, and they never ask voice de Ausweis. They never ask this because that's good enough, except for that app, which works with foreign ID cards for like EU citizens, but not with a passport, because you get the ID card either when you come here as a foreigner and have to register as a foreigner, or when you grew up here as a citizen. So just to put it in perspective of how dumb German digital governance is, I still have better experiences with German UI like this than I've had with the United States. So again, you want a UI that is not very hassly for passengers. So eliminate friction, eliminate the fare gates, just add like a lot of shuffling time. They create crowd control problems. Maybe only in very large cities and very rare events, because usually you will build the system to contain crowd control. But then in Paris, do not try to take the system during really big events. So for example, 2018, it's the World Cup. France just won. There's a million people finding their way to Champs-Élysées, and the system broke. By which I mean the metro, and here's the thing, the metro was not overcrowded. There were empty seats. I had an empty seat riding the metro from Nation to Points West, and it's not because it's there very far east, so it filled. No, I mean maybe there were no longer available seats, but it was very ample. Maybe it was just all the seats filled or something, but it was not very crowded. However, everyone was traveling through the same 5 stations on Champs-Élysées. One of them closed because they could not handle the crowd control problem from all the people trying to exit the fare barriers, which are reinforced because the French elite thinks that the French people are all criminals. An assumption that is not particularly accordant with actual French crime rates. And even if it was a date on which everyone was traveling to there, they knew that everyone was traveling there because the World Cup, the World Cup, first of all, people know, so usually when it's not the World Cup, it's for New Year's, like Sylvester, and for Bastille Day. These are not secrets. Bastille Day has not been a secret since 1789. Sylvester has not been like a secret day since whenever people in Europe started celebrating that as a holiday. Don't even know when that is. It's entirely possible this is. It's entirely possible this might even have Roman roots. And the World Cup, yeah, I mean, it was not known that France would win, but by the time it became clear who's going into the finals, France was heavily favored. They should have known that such a thing might happen. For example, by propping open these exit gates, but by popping open all the entrance gates so that people could all exit. And once one station fails, the next station, all the people trying to go there go to the next station, right? So that station also fails. So you have cascading failure. I didn't even go to Champs-Élysées. I ended up exiting at the first, maybe even second suburban station, having to walk all the way back. Not all the way back from like the western suburbs to Nation, all the way back from the western suburbs to Etoile. Just because everything was shut down. This is how bad it was. So faregates create crowd control problems in very big cities. I should also say that in Berlin they had crowd control problems, or they think they had crowd control problems. I don't think they had real ones. At the Greta protests, so well over 2 years ago. It was not the failure did not cascade. They shut down Brandenburger and dumped us all at Friedrichstrasse, and we walked from Friedrichstrasse. So that became part of the protest, walking in the middle of the street from Friedrichstrasse to Brandenburger Tor. But again, first of all, the failure did not cascade, and second, I don't think the failure was real. I think they were just trying to get people not to go to Brandenburger Tor. So at any rate, the faregates are very extra. Don't do that. And again, that's kind of orthogonal with attack, because fare barriers can be done with any kind of attack, and lack thereof can also be done with any kind of attack. I mean, you can do the entire Asian system without fare barriers. The one thing you do need to worry about with the Asian system, because if it's point to point, then so if you have a point-to-point pass, then whatever. But point-to-point systems, most people will not have passes, so you need to make sure that people can validate. Now, on buses, people can validate on the bus or at the station. That's very easy because validators are essentially free. In the 2000s, Sony. So my current computer is a Lenovo. I am looking for. If you've watched this on either Twitch or YouTube, you are familiar with my rant about the low quality of my computer. It's not that it's low quality. Lenovo's computers are very good. I keep buying them if they were not involved in concentration camp slave labor. The problem is that my computer is from 2016, and this is not a 2016 year. And so anyway, I'm looking for a device I want to get, but at any rate, the one time I did not buy Lenovo, I bought the Sony Vaio, which was okay. The main problem with the Vaio, there was some battery problem, but at any rate, I ceased to use the Sony for reasons that have nothing to do with the tech and everything to do with I lost it on the subway and was stolen, and therefore I never got it back. And then I bought Lenovo. But the point is that the Sony Vaio already came with an inbuilt system that I could not use because I lived in New York, but could be used in Singapore, called Pasuri, which with a I think it was a €40 device that could plug in and would charge your Fedica card, because the Fedica cards are the standard in all of Japan. They're also used in a bunch of other places. They're not very common in Europe, but you can kind of say that it's mostly an Asian thing. So Octopus, Singapore, Indonesia, China sometimes does Fedica and sometimes does the other system, which is the ISO standard, which is MIFARE plus a couple other things. So let's see. Some lines in China. I'm forgetting whether Shanghai uses this and Beijing doesn't, or it's the other way around. US, Singapore, and again all of Japan, and let me see if ridership. Yeah. So all of Japan, not Japan. Japan, not Japan. Yeah, so anyway, so because that system is a huge part of the market, Sharika, Sony, and it's developed by Sony. Sony also has a thing in the Vio, or used to have a thing in the Vio that would let you plug in a consumer thing for $40 that would, or 50, I think it was $40 that will let you charge it at home. You needed to pay online, but you could charge it at home. So that was a system that cost $40 15 years ago. Today, I'm pretty sure it comes inbuilt into every, and not just for Ferica, but for everything. It comes built into every phone. So the cost of providing these on board a bus is approximately zero. The cost of providing these at every bus stop is also approximately zero. The main cost would be paying people to go around and like nail the readers and like a set of instructions to every bus stop. The cost of that is approximately the same as the cost of nailing a timetable to all of these, which is approximately, again, zero. Now, you can always make the zero cost $30,000 for a single bus stop if you really put your heart into it. Americans are have this very can-do spirit about budget bloat sometimes. And I've heard of examples that try to have solar panels at a bus stop so that the electronic displays would not depend on the city grid, because for some reason you cannot tap into the city grid even though the cable is right underneath you, because the power company is not going to collaborate with your pilot program. And once you have a pilot program, that's the standard how to do it. So even power company might collaborate with a bigger thing. If it sounds dumb, remember how I just said that American UI is terrible? Yeah. So the point is, tapping on a bus is very easy. You do it on a bus or at the bus stop. You do it if you don't have a valid monthly. If you have a valid monthly within a zone, nobody needs to know where and when you're going, because we live in a free country. I know it's shocking. I know it's shocking, but the AfD people control 0 elected posts. This is how much people here take the concept of Germany as a free country seriously. And so the point is, point to point, you would still need to make people tap. And again, that's technologically a solved problem. You tap on the bus, entry and exit, or bus stop, doesn't matter. At a subway station or a commuter rail station, you would tap. You need tapping stations at the platform. If it's a very small scale operation, you might want to move the entire operation from the platform to the train. This is when you have fewer trains and platforms. So this is generally for low frequency operations. It's not exactly a matter of size, right? Because if so there's kind of scale dependence issue, right? Whereas if I take the city and I just make it twice as big, then it's twice as many trains and twice as many stations. So it shouldn't matter. But what matters is frequency. So if I have not a lot of trains relative to the number of stations, that probably means that I have low frequency. Maybe it also means I have a very non-urban regional system, so it's one line making a lot of stops, and it's maybe a large system rather than anything self-contained. So we'll probably not want to equip this with to equip this on the stations, only on the trains. And that's legit. I mean, you can do this on the train. There's even a button called Razzia, which is probably the worst name for this ever. Razzia is a raid. And it might have other uses. Let me see if they have Razzia. Yeah, it literally means a raid. For example, a police raid. For example, a roundup. So for some reason, so in the same way that I've had to deal with the exception with the fact that people use in Germany the people in Germany use the word raus in neutral context, uh, or Führer. I mean, Lokführer is a train driver, kind of train leader. Uh, so one of these words is razzia, where literally an inspector gets on the train. First thing they do is they press the razzia button, which means okay, they're doing an inspection, and therefore the machines, all the machines on the tram will stop working until the inspection is over. The point of this is to deter passengers from waiting for the inspector to board and only then buying a ticket, because then they only buy if there's an inspector, and that defeats the whole purpose of BOP. It's a completely fine thing, by the way. I'm just specifically complaining about the use of the word razzia for such a thing. Like, I mean, razzia is not if you're looking for people who don't have a ticket. Razzia is if you're looking for either people who have a yellow star, or if you get what I'm saying, people who did not put on the yellow star that they needed to put. So the So this is again, all of this is to solve the problem. The situation is whether you want to be in a position where you're giving people like tickets where the state specifically forgoes the ability to track movements by saying, yeah, okay, okay, you have a monthly ticket, yeah, sure, just okay, ride wherever you want in Ile-de-France. We're not going to look where because because Le Pen actually lost that election. We are a free country, and and our concern is that you get vaccinated and don't steal things, and and pay taxes, rather than that you like send a diary with all your movements to some police person for some policeman to look at when he gets bored of beating minorities. So this is like the interplay. So again, there's this tech, and the systems evolve with tech. So in the same way that so I think there's a reason why we were lagging on smart card adoption, which is that due to the commonness, not commonality, it's a different word, due to the commonness of the monthly, we already had very low collection costs and did not need the smart card innovation. And likewise, and the same is true of contactless payment, with just cutting out the octopus type middleman and going to the direct with the credit card providers. We don't need that. I mean, we have very cheap processing already. Thank you very much. Talking to the United States here. And so so there's this kind of co-evolution. But things are, for the most part, converging in the same direction. It's just a question of a system. It depends, again, on what kind of fares you want to charge, what kind of fare box recovery you want. It depends on whether you like point-to-point more than you like zonal. Again, these are valid questions. I mean, I think that the Northern European answer is better than the East Asian one, but I mean, I'm not going to start dismissing East Asia as doing stupid things. I mean, do they do stupid things? Yes, but this is not a stupid thing. This is a thing that I understand why they're doing it, even if I think that a different tradition does something very specific better. So anyway, that's my point to make about fares, and I will take it to questions if anyone has any. So we'll give it, so what is the time now? 8:10. For some reason, even though it always happens that the rec time, when I look at it, lags a little bit behind the clock time. And I mean, the clock time is the real one, right? Otherwise, it would be drifting. So I know it was 6:10 when I clicked. So I don't know why this is dropping. Maybe it's a frame drop. I don't know. I will investigate when I upload. And my guess is it's a frame drop. Well, I guess the lifetime follows, not the frame clock, but the clock direct time. I don't know. I guess maybe it does. But again, if there are questions, I will be very happy to take them. But wait, this is 2 hours, and with dropped frames, that's only 1 more minute. Actually, maybe 1 more minute is all it is. Can't tell. No, it's going to be 1 minute in an hour in 120. That's 1 divided by 120 is a lot more than 0.3%. Let's give it, we can give it like, I don't know, 5 minutes or something. If people start typing things, because as usual, there's a little bit of a lag. It's not a 5-minute lag, I just don't want to be in a position of saying goodbye. Well, so with the difference between, due to POP, or no, it's not the POP, or POP increases your efficiency, and we have it, and Japan doesn't. No, the difference, so it's a couple differences. First of all, city size. Okay, Al, is your name Al or is it Alvican? I do not know whether to parse it correctly. But it will get to you in a bit. So the difference in farebox recovery. Oh, Alex, hi. The difference in farebox recovery is that it's a couple things. First of all, East Asian cities are larger. Half of Japan's population lives in Tokyo, Osaka, and Nagoya's metropolitan areas. Half of South Korea lives in Seoul. 40% of Taiwan's lives in Taipei. I don't think Kaohsiung has a profitable metro. I do not know about the municipal subways in Japan that are not Tokyo or Osaka. That's part of it. Another part is that as I understand it, East Asia doesn't subsidize pretend social services. I'm sure there's a lot. So there's a lot of bullshit involving place-based subsidies in Japan. For example, the LDP really likes subsidizing regions where people vote LDP and where LDP polls come from, like the Jatsu Shinkansen, is because so there's a Shinkansen lines that were built as a spine from. At this point, they go all the way from Kagoshima to Hakodate. That's kind of the main line of the Shinkansen, and that's in all the parts there for commercial purposes. And then there's the part for, and then there's a Jatsu branch to Niigata. And don't be wrong, Niigata is the largest city. It's not on this main spine, but also it's a line that was known from the start to be unprofitable and was built because the prime minister was from that area. So Japan absolutely has these place-based waste of money, but as I understand it, does not have them at the metropolitan level, only at the national level. And quite a lot of the losses here are, again, people trying to subsidize the suburbs out of a feeling that they're somehow either, it's always the idea is that the places that are not the city are more moral than the city. And it's carried here in an inter-metropolitan way that I do not think it is in Asia. That's at least my guess. That's the first thing. The second thing, that's the second thing. The first thing is size. The second thing is this. The third thing is just, there's more efficiency in operations, especially mainline rail. So the operating costs of the metros in Japan are only a hair lower than they are here. It's the range is over. So Japan overlaps our range. It's kind of at the lower end of our range, but it's maybe a little bit better than Berlin, maybe a little bit worse than Oslo. But there's definitely more efficiency. But then mainline rail, there's definitely more efficiency there in Japan than here. So that's the difference. It's again, the POP helps us. How does Germany deal with complaints that ticket inspectors are racist? In the exact same way that Germany, and for that matter, the United States, deal with any complaints about racism. That is, ignoring them. And it does not, and saying that you should have fare gates because ticket inspectors are racist is bullshit. NYPD, NYPD manages to be perfectly racist with fare gates. In fact, generally the racism comes from the concept of being a cop. And so when you try to turn fair beating from a civil thing, from a civilian thing, where there's an Eagle team and they're civilians, they're not in uniform, they're not hired from the same spots as cops, and so from these people, I mean, do you see racism? Yeah, and then it makes the and then it makes Twitter when there's a video of this. But then when you're trying to do literally anything else, and then you create a system where fair bidding is not treated as something, yeah, someone might do, is kind of like driving a little bit over the speed limit, and then they get caught by camera. And instead of doing that, they're trying to make this much more cop-like, and that's where a lot of the violence comes from. But at the end of the day, I mean, like, why are there cops on the subway in New York? Because the city has made a decision that there should be a lot of very visible police presence. And it doesn't matter whether, like, what the fare system is or whether there even is a fare. I mean, there in America, there are armed soldiers, not even cops, armed soldiers, patrolling Penn Station. And I don't mean the subway stations, I mean the parts of Penn Station that are free to enter. And in France, there are armed soldiers that you will see patrolling parts of city center with a very large concentration of tourists. I mean, yeah, one of the things you see in Paris all the time, if you walk around the Notre Dame, is you'll sometimes see armed soldiers. It depends. In Germany, it's always plainclothes. So imagine Vienna would be the same. In Paris, there a specific transit fare control agency that is, I believe, uniform. I don't know if it's real uniform or just like a jacket that says control. But they're separate from the police. The Paris police is part of the national police. Nobody gives a shit what the mayor thinks. Nobody gives a shit what the conseil, what the président conseil, the président du conseil thinks. People care what the minister of the interior thinks. But that's again not the same as the control for LATP, which is a completely separate thing. Should there be uniform? No. Should there be mass transit authority personnel? Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a job with the transit authority in the same way that if I work as a planner, I am mass transit authority personnel. If I'm a bus driver, I'm mass transit authority personnel. If I run their social media account, I'm mass transit authority personnel. If I'm the person at the MTA who was handling the video that that's handling my video, then I'm MTA personnel. This is I do not know if it was ever published. They what I just right accidentally off my computer. So a couple years ago, I think it was just before Corona, when I visited, they took a short video of me talking about interlining, like what it is, pros and cons. I do not know if it was ever made public. If it was, it will link to it. So all of these people, yeah, they're mass transit authority personnel. Some are uniformed, some are not, but that's not cops. That's not police. These are not people who are hired as police. These are not hired from the same pipelines. These are not trained in the same way. They have from time to time they have to deal with corporate bullshit like DEI seminars or whatever. Whereas the police has its own set of corporate bullshit, like someone telling them about the warrior ethos and the sheepdog or whatever thing that or whatever things that clearly show the police has too much money, not because they're doing a lot of overtime abuse, even though they are, but because they're bringing in these grifters to give a speech in front of the cops that has at best zero value, at worst very negative value. Again, different thing. I can't tell if it answers your question about like what to do with ticket inspectors, but I mean, the racism complaints again. I mean, the way they're actually treated is ignored. Even again, in places that talk about how anti-racist they are, it's just mostly the way you reduce racism is by, for example, not having cops shoot people in the city, and that's not a transit issue. Sure, no problem. Are there other questions? Give it I can give it another minute. Um, Again, because I know that it takes time to type. Prime content on YouTube, along scratching their hair and drinking water. So, anyway, thank you for watching this video. I do not know whether there will be one in a week. It's very unlikely they will miss 2 weeks in a row then. I think people are a little more social New Year's if you guys celebrate the day Jesus was not born, because most likely it was born in August or something. And I will see you again soon with another video, so thank you.